The wheels of my trailer crunched over the gravel drive as the midnight fog curled around the trees. After 22 years of Navy deployments and temporary addresses, I was finally home back to the lake ranch my grandfather built with his bare hands in 1968, a rugged pine-framed cabin nestled just beyond the shore. It stood like a monument to our family's legacy. Quiet, untouched mine, but peace. I quickly learned was no longer part of the landscape. A laminated paper slapped against my old rusted mailbox in the breeze. I tore it off and squinted under the dome light of my truck. It was an HOA violation notice already filled out, already signed. Unauthorized trailer activity, it read. Arrival outside approved hours. Fine, $250. My brow furrowed. There was no HOA when I left. Our land had always sat just outside the governing lines, but someone clearly disagreed. Then came the voice. Excuse me, hello, you can't park that here. I turned to see her. Bathrobe cinched tight, arms crossed, eyes narrowed like twin daggers in the dark. Her hair was lacquered into a helmet of blonde curls, and her expression carried the smugness of someone used to being obeyed. Are you aware this is a regulated community? She snapped. Noise ordinances are strictly enforced, and trailer access after 9 p.m. is forbidden. I took a breath and stepped out of the truck. My boots hit the dirt with a solid thud. I'm just arriving, I said calmly. This is my land, my family's cabin. Been in the deed since '68. Her nose wrinkled like I'd stepped in dog dirt. I'm Karen Walker, president of the Lakeview Pines HOA, and your family's history doesn't change our rules. This area falls under community oversight now. She flicked open a folder in her hand, multiple copies of citations, warnings, and what looked like a newsletter with her face plastered at the top. This is a quiet neighborhood, she added. People live here to relax, not to be disturbed by us, construction workers and boats in the middle of the night. I stared at her for a moment. The steel behind my ribs, the one the Navy had forged, tightened. I'm not a contractor. I just got back from active duty, I said. This land is off-grid, always has been, and as far as I know it was never part of any HOA agreement. Karen didn't blink. Instead, she raised her phone. Well then, let's let the police sort it out. She dialed 911. Double quotes. Yes, I'm reporting a trespasser, possibly armed, unloading a trailer in the middle of the night. Says he owns the property, but there's no record in our HOA database. Please send someone quickly. She looked directly at me as she said it, like she wanted to watch the reaction on my face. But I'd faced worse than Karen Walker in desert storms and ocean blackouts. I didn't flinch. I turned without another word, opened the cabin door and stepped inside. Everything was exactly where I'd left it years ago, dusted over but intact. The flag my grandfather had flown, the old fishing rod in the corner, a photo of my father holding me at the dock, both of us grinning. Outside I heard her pacing, muttering. Headlights soon crested over the trees. A single patrol car. The officer knocked gently but respectfully. Sir, mind if I talk to you a moment? I stepped out onto the porch. She called it in, he said, jerking his thumb toward Karen, now standing arms akimbo like she owned the soil. I have the deed, I said, and pulled the folder from my glove box. He reviewed it, nodding slowly. All checks out. Looks like your land was never brought under HOA jurisdiction when the lines were redrawn 10 years ago. You're not obligated to follow their regulations. Karen's face twisted. This kind of activity sets a bad precedent. Trailers, loud equipment, military trucks, this isn't what the community wants. The officer turned to her. Ma'am, he's not breaking any laws. If you have further concerns, I suggest you take it up with a civil attorney. But calling 911 for a non-criminal matter, that's misuse of emergency services. She went silent. The cruiser pulled away. I watched the taillights vanish into the dark. Karen stood at the edge of my drive, eyes still boring into me like bullets that couldn't pierce armor. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just declared war on the wrong man, and I wasn't the type to surrender, not on my land, not ever. By sunrise, the air was thick with pine and paranoia. Karen Walker was already at it, marching up and down the gravel shoulder outside my fence line, clipboard in one hand, cell phone in the other. She wore that same robe, now with bright white sneakers, like she'd suited up for battle. The previous night's 911 stunt hadn't satisfied her. No, this woman didn't just want me gone. She wanted to control me. I brewed a strong cup of black coffee, took it to the porch and watched her scribble something frantically on her notepad. 2 minutes later, a paper was zip-tied to my gate. Violation, unauthorized generator use fine, $500 payable to Lakeview Pines HOA. I laughed under my breath. The generator sat behind the cabin, humming softly, powering a few work lights in my fridge. It wasn't loud, certainly not loud enough to justify a fine, let alone from someone with no legal authority over my property. But Karen didn't deal in facts. She dealt in intimidation, and she wielded her clipboard like a sword. That afternoon, I drove into town to visit the county recorder's office. I needed certainty, something official I could slam on the table the next time she pushed too far. It didn't take long. 10 minutes and a couple of scanned documents later, I had what I needed: a certified copy of the original deed, land survey, and an official statement confirming my property sat outside the HOA boundaries. The line was clear. She just didn't care. When I returned, a bright orange sticker was slapped across my cabin door: notice of non-compliance property. Under review. She'd escalated illegally. I yanked the sticker down, stuffed it into my pocket, and walked straight to her house. It was 2 lots over, pristine, obnoxiously beige, with matching flower pots flanking the door like little sentries. I knocked. Karen answered with an expression that said she'd been expecting me and was disappointed I hadn't come sooner. You're out of line, I said, holding up the deed. This proves you and your HOA have zero authority over my land. She didn't even glance at it. Instead, she crossed her arms and smiled in that smug, slow way people do when they think they know something you don't. You're disturbing the community, she said. Your generator, your truck, your presence. Property values will suffer. I don't care about your property values, I replied. I care about being left alone on land my grandfather built with his own 2 hands. She shrugged. Well, the board disagrees. And last night, we held a special vote. The HOA has formally annexed your parcel into the community oversight zone. My mouth opened, but no words came out for a second. That wasn't just arrogance, it was lunacy. You can't annex land you don't own, I said. This isn't some medieval fiefdom. You don't get to redraw boundaries because you don't like the neighbor. She tilted her head. We'll see what the county says. In the meantime, I suggest you start complying, or fines will accumulate. And trust me, most folks around here don't take kindly to troublemakers. There it was, the threat. Not just legal nonsense, but the implication that she had the community on her side, that she'd stir them up into a frenzy if I didn't fold. But I'd seen real conflict: bullets, blood, and chaos. This was just noise. I turned and walked away. That evening, 3 more notices appeared: fines for unauthorized dock access, excessive noise, and improper flag display. One even accused me of aggressive posturing, whatever that meant. She was trying to papercut me into surrender, but she didn't know what I was planning. I made a call to Nancy Tufton, old friend and now a tenacious attorney who owed me more than a few favors. I explained the situation. She asked for photos, scanned documents, and a quick timeline. Looks like she's setting herself up for a harassment and civil overreach case. Nancy said, give me 48 hours. Let's turn her fake empire into a legal disaster. I hung up and looked across the lake as the sun dipped below the trees. The water shimmered with golden ripples. Behind me, the generator kicked back on. Steady unbothered. Let her keep finding me. Let her keep barking at shadows. Because if Karen thought this was still a game of forms and fences, she hadn't yet realized she wasn't just messing with a homeowner. She was going to war with a man who never lost one. 2 days later, the gravel shook under the weight of incoming wheels. It was exactly midnight when the first truck arrived, headlights off, engine whispering. Then came the second, then the third. All 5 rolled up my private lane in sequence. Like clockwork, Karen's lights across the street flicked on. Her silhouette stood framed in the upstairs window. Clutching her binoculars, let her watch. This was my response. The first truck carried a prefab, dock extension, and a floating solar array. The second held materials for a new boathouse, modular, low profile, and fully permitted by the county. The third and fourth, personal deliveries from veteran buddies of mine, retired SEALs, logistics experts, and off-grid survivalists who knew how to set up camp in enemy territory. The final truck, it bore a surprise Karen wouldn't see coming by sunrise. The property had transformed. A new security fence rose around the cabin's perimeter. Motion-triggered floodlights blinked to life one by one. A gravel path led to the soon-to-be-installed workshop, and American and Navy flags flapped proudly at the dock's edge. No noise violations, no trespass, every step precisely legal, every action defensible. Karen, however, couldn't comprehend precision. She only understood control. At 6:03 a.m., the sirens came. 2 county cruisers rolled in slowly, crunching over the loose rock. Officer Delgado stepped out first, same calm face as before, but today he had backup. Karen stood right behind them, smug as ever, arms folded, wearing a peach-colored tracksuit like she thought it was body armor. That's him, she said, gesturing wildly at my setup. He's constructed unauthorized structures, deployed armed men, and installed surveillance cameras pointed at my home. This is harassment. I stepped out onto the porch, freshly brewed coffee in hand. Morning, Officer Delgado raised a brow. You mind showing us your permits? Not at all. I handed him a folder of documents stamped by the county clerk, dated survey maps, a signed statement from my attorney, and a formal complaint we'd filed against Karen for HOA overreach and property harassment. Delgado read in silence. Karen leaned in, trying to get a peek. Then he turned to her. Ma'am, he began slowly. This property is outside the HOA's legal jurisdiction. It has been for over 50 years. Your attempts to fine, threaten, or interfere with Mr. Hayes are not only unauthorized. They may be actionable. Karen blinked, but he has armed guards, Security lights. He's setting up some sort of militia compound. I nearly laughed. They're veterans, Delgado said flatly. Private citizens on private property. You don't get to call in a tactical alert because you don't like the company your neighbor keeps. Her mouth twitched, but I filed an emergency annexation vote. Delgado turned to me. Did your lawyer mention that? She did, I said. And she's currently drafting a CS. You'll be receiving it in person. Karen's face turned crimson. Then she noticed the fifth truck it had parked at the edge of the drive, and now its steel crate was being lowered to the gravel with a mechanical hiss. She took a step forward, squinting, curious. I pulled back the top. Inside gleamed a decommissioned Lake County Patrol airboat, gifted to me by the sheriff himself as a gesture of appreciation for my service. The sheriff and I had trained together years ago in Panama. The airboat bore an engraved brass plate on the side in honor of Chief Petty Officer Hayes for service and stewardship. Karen's jaw slackened. Delgado nodded, clearly impressed. Well, that's what you brought. I smiled. Karen took a stumbling step backward, her confidence unraveling. Her eyes darted to the other officers, then to me, then to the quiet veterans standing by the Boathouse Foundation. Calm, capable, and completely legal. The power shifted in an instant. She had no fines, no votes, no leverage, just an ego backed by a clipboard, and it had just snapped in half. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed down the gravel path toward her home, muttering something about calling the mayor. But even she knew this wasn't her fight anymore. This was something far beyond her reach. I sipped my coffee as the officers pulled away, then turned back to my cabin. The land was still. The lake shimmered like polished glass, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like mine again. But the battle wasn't over yet. Karen had made too much noise, burned too many bridges, and filed too many false complaints. The reckoning was coming, and she was nowhere near prepared for what happened next. Karen didn't show her face for 3 days, not that I blamed her. Word travels fast in small communities, especially when the HOA president gets publicly corrected by law enforcement and watches her carefully curated narrative unravel in front of uniformed witnesses. But Karen wasn't one to retreat quietly. She reemerged, not with humility, but with defiance, tripling down through group emails, HOA bulletins, and a neighborhood Facebook post that read, "We must protect the character of Lakeview Pines from hostile, destabilizing elements." She meant me. Within hours, screenshots circulated. One neighbor replied, "You mean the Navy vet who owns his land legally? You're out of control." Another posted a link to the sheriff's press release, honoring my service and clarifying my land's exemption from HOA jurisdiction. The post went viral in the community. The tide was turning, and then the audit happened. Nancy, true to her word, filed a formal complaint with the county compliance board, citing Karen's fabricated violations, false emergency calls, and her illegal attempt to annex my property. But the audit uncovered more than we expected. Karen had been skimming from HOA funds for years. She'd hired her niece as a consultant, who had billed the HOA over $12,000 for landscaping assessments. That never occurred. Karen used HOA money to host wine and cheese mixers at luxury venues and had charged the association for security patrols that amounted to her neighbor's teenage son biking around with a walkie-talkie. The findings ignited a firestorm. An emergency board meeting was called. I didn't attend, but I didn't need to. Half the neighborhood showed up with printouts and pitchforks. "I've lived here for 11 years, one man said. "This woman fined me $300 for planting marigolds. She trespassed on my property to measure how tall my mailbox was." Another resident added. Nancy and I watched the live stream quietly from my cabin. Karen sat at the head of the table, jaw locked, trying to hold the gavel like it meant something. But power doesn't come from posture, it comes from trust. And hers had evaporated. A motion was introduced. Immediate removal of Karen Walker as HOA president. Seconded. Voted. Unanimous. She tried to interrupt, tried to stall with procedural nonsense, but the board had had enough. Her authority dissolved in real time. By the next morning, a new notice was taped to her own door, this time by her replacement. It read simply, "Karen Walker is no longer affiliated with the Lakeview Pines Homeowners Association. All fines issued under her direction are void." She moved out a week later. No one came to help her pack. I watched from my dock as her beige SUV rolled down the road, a trailer hitched to the back, the same way I'd arrived just weeks before, but with one key difference. I came home, she was leaving exile. Peace settled in like morning fog on the water. The false violations stopped. The hate mail vanished. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now waved, some even dropping by with baked goods or quiet thanks. One afternoon, a boy from the cul-de-sac wandered over, eyes wide at the airboat resting at my dock. "Are you the Navy guy?" he asked. I smiled. "Used to be. Now I'm just the lake guy." He grinned, then pointed to the flagpole where Old Glory rippled in the breeze. "My grandpa was Navy too. He'd like it here." I nodded. "Then he's welcome any time." The cabin came back to life slowly, with help from friends. I finished the boathouse, set up the workshop, and turned one corner of the land into a quiet retreat for fellow veterans, a place to breathe, to heal. Karen's empire had been built on fear and fines. Mine, on memory, on legacy, on land earned, not seized. She thought she could rewrite boundaries with paper and threats. But some lines are drawn in history sealed with service and sacrifice. And when you come for a man's home without cause, you'd better be ready for what he brings.